My name is Isabella Johnston, and I am the Intern Whisperer, which is a part of Employers for Change. Today's tip of the week is about accessibility on digital content. You want to remember to reduce the background opacity. When you do that, you want to increase the contrast. That makes the text easier to read for those with any visual impairments, and it's just good design. Okay, so welcome to the Intern Whisperer Show, and today's guest is Steve Isaac. So Steve, I am so excited to have met you at a Epic Game event at the Serious Play Conference and to have you as a guest. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
So exciting. So typically how we start the show off is we ask our guests to share 5 words that describe them and why those 5 words. So what are the words you would use to describe you and why?
So I'll start with facilitator. And, this comes a little bit earlier. We were chatting and you had used the term educator because I've been teaching for a very long time. But I prefer the word facilitator because I think as there was a shift in my teaching life, I started to realize the importance of facilitating the learning process. And granted, educator falls into that, no problem. But I definitely like it over teacher and the idea of feeling like I'm supposed to be teaching everything rather than facilitating learning. So that word I think is important to me. Uh, Another is connector or community builder. And one of the things I've just loved, during my life is bringing people together, whether it be groups of friends or introducing people or, in the education space, building communities among educators, especially as, being involved in game-based learning and game design. There often weren't many others doing what I was doing in my immediate surroundings. So it became really important to find your community. So I've really, really embraced that and just love it. I mean, I really like bringing people together and sort of seeing, relationships form out of that. Uh, can't not use the word gamer. I do love games, whether it be tabletop games or video games. You might see in my background, I have my Nintendo NES and SNES Classic, my Nintendo Switch, my Xbox. I just love and I'm fascinated by games. Sometimes I think more as a collector than necessarily a player, but I do love games. And they've been a big part of my life. Uh, Another word that I think is important for me is accepting, and I think it's I view myself as somebody that's very accepting of others. I really I really hope that people feel that they can be themselves, and certainly hope they can feel they can be themselves around me. I definitely think that we live in a world where that's not always easy, but yet I really value people's individuality and whatever form that may take. And I think I would like to think that or hope that more people could sort of start being more accepting in general. I'm sure I'm not perfect in that area, but it's definitely something a core value that's very important to me. And definitely a family guy. My family's very important to me. Going to my extended family, but certainly my immediate family right now. I have a lovely wife who we've been married for 28 years,
Whoa,
which is
congratulations.
pretty pretty awesome and sometimes seems miraculous. Um, and we have 2 great kids and you know they're at the center of my universe for sure.
Oh, those are really great things. And just so our listeners know, we actually have never defined these terms. How would you define the difference between a facilitator and an educator? Because there is a big difference. And like
Yeah.
yourself, I made that leap also.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, traditionally, I think when we think of educator or teacher, we think of somebody whose role it is to, in my in my belief, to impart knowledge and to be sort of, even for lack of a better term, maybe the keeper of the knowledge at times, and the one to give that out, and expect our students to learn because we
Mhm.
shared what we shared with them. And as a facilitator, I believe it's much more important to facilitate the learning process. I think students need to own their learning for their own sake. I think we need to learn because we're interested in learning, and because you know problems are meaningful to us, and that learning to and understanding comes from that. um, I've always been a big fan also of constructivist learning, which is, sort of in my mind, the idea that we learn from all of the experiences around us, again, not from somebody telling us something, but maybe from a collection of all of the different things that we're exposed to. So I think it's important that we do distinguish that, and that we allow people sort of a freedom to learn, but that we're there to support them.
Yep, I totally agree. I feel that a lot of things that happen in education is that it's one directional. That's
Hmm.
usually how I explain it too. Whereas whoever the teacher is in front of the room, they disseminate all of the information one way, and it's
Right.
not as interactive or maybe as engaged as what it could be. And
Right.
facilitators open that box up.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, to your point, like, I've learned so much from. I always like to say that I learn with and from my students. I've
Right.
learned a lot from them. There have been a lot of areas where they've been, had a greater level of expertise than I might, but yet I can still help support them, in certain ways. So I do think that's all, really so important, to acknowledge, that that's a reality.
Yeah, that is now deemed peer and reverse mentoring, just so you know. It's
Makes
not
sense.
like, yeah, in the education realm, it's like in the classroom, it's still, teaching. However, if you're in the workplace, it's
Mm,
youngers are teaching their elders or people that have more experience, not necessarily even age. But it's nice. It's nice to see that it's very interactive and
mhm.
multi-generational for sure. So, where did you go to school? How'd you get to where you are now? What has that journey been like?
Yeah, so I I went to Rutgers. I'm from New Jersey. I spent most of my life in New Jersey, and went to Rutgers and initially started studying psychology, thinking I wanted to be a psychologist or therapist. Um, Interestingly, I started working in a group home, for adults with special needs. I don't know, the terminology always changes, but it was adults who had developmental disabilities, and I loved it. A lot of what we were doing in our support role there at the group home was helping with, everyday living, kind of normalization, bringing, kind
Right.
of creating um that home life
Independent
environment,
living? Yeah.
um as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, you know I didn't really know, starting that job, that I was gonna fall in love with it and fall in love with working with people in that capacity and such, but I did. And while I was doing that, a friend of mine at school kind of just suggested, maybe I should also get a degree. At Rutgers, they didn't have an education major, but you could get certified in an area of education. So she suggested getting certified in special education. And I thought about it and I'm like, well, if nothing else, it like a psychology degree is sort of like your license to go for more school, where, the education certification at least could lead to, a career out of
Mhm.
school. So I
Mhm.
thought, sure, let me try that. So I did, and I, ended up getting a job in special education initially, which is a very interesting kind of story as well. I was originally hired. I was going to be a job coach for students leaving middle school and going to high school, and they were doing a transition program where they were going to be out in the community sampling jobs, and all of that was very exciting to me. I was so excited about this position because some of what I did in the group homes extended into some of their, like, working in their some of the training centers and things like that during the day. Well, it turned out, one of those days where you walk in to the, the district office to try to kind of orient yourself before the start of your very first school year. And the assistant superintendent asked me if I heard about the change in my position. I said no.
Oh, that's
So
not a good sign.
no. So they found somebody with a lot more experience in that particular role, but fortunate, I guess, for me, they happened to have a position that they didn't have somebody for, which was very unique. There was a family from a very rural area in China that moved to Montclair, New Jersey, and I believe the family was brought over. They were from like a nomadic sort of area, and they like literally traveling around China. The kids had never gone to school in China. They were 9, 10, and 12 years old. The father, I think, was brought over by family to work in a restaurant, and these three kids were all technically diagnosed, as being special needs and having developmental disability, but like I said, also had never ever been in school before. So effectively, I was hired to be like their personal teacher
Tutor? Yeah.
initially. Yeah, like it was like that was my class, me, these three kids, and then there was a boy, um, a boy with Down syndrome who was also in the class. So that was the start. Now I had 4 students, and it was going to ultimately grow from there. But it was just fascinating because I was like, felt like I was this 22, 23-year-old kid now feeling almost like this, sort of parental role in a sense for these three kids that it was amazing. It was amazing. Grew very close to these kids. People who heard that I was hired thought I was hired because I spoke this obscure dialect of Chinese, which was as far from the truth as could be. I knew no Chinese. We had to learn to communicate, across languages, and it was
It's
but it
almost
was
like sign language,
I I don't even
a
know. I
lot
mean,
of pointing.
yeah, whatever it took, but it was but we grew quite a bond. It was a very interesting it was one of those things you could never ask for or expect, but turned out to be, pretty great. But there we were in a science and technology magnet school, and one of the things I noticed was we had access to a lot of technology. So I would take advantage of that with my students and bring them in to the computer lab and find software that would support their learning needs. But also they were all on different levels, learning different things. So a lot of times the software facilitated that learning, or at least allowed kids to be working on different things with me supporting them. So that's sort of where the interest more and more in technology and education came from, and games, because there were a lot of times where a game could be effective at kind of supporting their learning. But
Hmm.
so that's where that started. And then I my wife and I opened a computer training center with another couple where we ran summer camps and after school programs, and later multiplayer gaming in the evenings. And then I got a job teaching technology courses at a middle school near where our store was, and you know started teaching game design as an after school club, and then ultimately asked if I could start a game design program for our middle school, which was essentially an elective. And the rest of my career, which was like the next 16, 17 years, I taught exclusively game design and development in middle school, and then towards the end also at our high school.
Was that relatively cutting edge at the time?
I think so. I mean, the computer center that we had, I mean, this is like now it's 25 plus years ago
Okay, so
that
it
we
had to
had
be
that.
the big giant monitors, right? There's no flat screens.
Definitely. No, 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 no
Yeah,
flat screens,
yeah.
CRT monitors. A our internet connection at initially was a 56K line. So if you remember modems, I mean, we
Yeah.
got to a point where you'd have a 56K modem in your house, but when we had this, that was considered fast internet. Eventually
It
we
made the
upgraded.
noise,
No,
like the
that was
AOL noise.
no, that one didn't, because it was a dedicated line. So it had
Okay.
that idea of like how we feel about broadband, but it was
Mhm.
not, we thought it was fast until we started trying to play certain games online on the net, over against other
Mm-hmm.
teams, and realized we had no capacity. So then we upgraded to like a T1. But whatever the case was, it was a really neat place for kids to be able to come and hang out and find other kids that were interested in the same, things, and have a place, a kind of an affinity space that they could enjoy together. So that was another really special, you know, time. And then I think the game design in the classroom, it was definitely cutting edge. I mean, quite honestly, not many people were teaching game design. And as the years went on, it got really nice because other schools would start thinking about it, and they'd come visit and see, my program, and determine if that was something that they could bring into their school. So it was fun to be, you know, you know, it was it was an exciting time, and it's really exciting now to see where we've come.
I would call you a futurist at that time. Yeah, definitely. Very forward thinking and futurist, especially when you're working with people that have some type of challenge, whether
Mhm.
it's a disability or it's a language barrier. Both of those are very unique, and it's able to bridge a gap that's desperately needed to help them feel like they're mainstreamed. That's the education word we used to
Yep,
use to
yep.
replace normal,
Right,
whatever
right,
normal is, right?
right.
Yeah. So, wow, that is very exciting. Huh. Did you ever pick up any Chinese? I'm just curious.
Very no, very little. The interesting thing is my wife happens to be Chinese. So my,
Okay,
my
you've got to be kidding me.
yeah, 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 yeah. So my in-laws, like, so they speak, yeah, but I don't know very little. I know, like, yeah,
Hello,
um,
goodbye.
hello, goodbye, a few things, yeah, like,
Yeah, like where's the bathroom
please,
help?
please, or thank you, but
Yeah.
definitely not enough to get by.
Yeah. Duolingo is your friend. Just saying.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That's a serious game.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So what is EdTech Bridge? I saw that and I went, oh, this sounds really interesting. I'd like to know more about it. So I'm going to let
Yeah.
our listeners gain from that experience.
Sure, sure. So, y- I, I used the word connector. One of the things that happened, when I was using technology with my students, I would start to get interested in the ed tech companies that created the products, and I would end up like reaching out to them for kind of whether it be support, or maybe I had features I wanted to request. And what I came to find was that most of these, you know, ed tech companies were very happy to hear from and receive feedback from an educator. And then, it led to things like becoming very involved with Brain Pop. With GameStar Mechanic was a product I was using, so I started to interact with the staff there and everything. And before I knew it, they were seeking advice from me, not just me asking them for something or whatever. And we developed a lot of these great relationships. And even like one of the tools my kids were using was Game Maker. So I became friendly with the people at Yo-Yo Games, who happen to be in Dundee, Scotland. And when I was on a trip to Scotland, I, visited their offices and such. It's like I really developed these like real relationships with these different
Mhm.
companies and did things with them. I attended some conferences, with them to support them and such. And a number of years ago, Katya Hott, who at the time was at GameStar Mechanic, or when I first started working with her, she was at GameStar Mechanic. She moved over to BrainPop, and she had an idea to talk about some of the work we'd been doing at South by Southwest EDU. So she proposed to me to have a problem solving session. It was a type of session they had at South by, where you basically are setting up almost like a workshop where you're workshopping a problem with the community there. So our title of this was EdTech Bridge, and it was about bridging the gap between educators and EdTech developers. And the hypothesis essentially was that educators wanted to work with developers, developers wanted to work with educators, but neither side really knew how to facilitate this, or to how to make this happen. So we were really seeking a community approach to talking about this and seeing where we could go with this. And our story was, that I had worked with Katya in two of her different positions, and I had come into their offices and done work with them as sort of a contractor at times and things, and we had really it made progress. I mean, there were other things like with Brain Pop becoming part of their or helping even them create, I think, their ambassador program and things like that. So our idea was at the end was we wanted to have a call to action. We were bringing this whole community together. It was like we didn't want to have an hour and a half workshop and then say goodbye and never address this again. So our kind of commitment was to start a Twitter chat, which ran for years after this. So we had a Wednesday night, I think it was at 7:30 at night for an hour, a chat called EdTech Bridge, and we were bringing together educators and developers primarily, and we would have topics each week that just dealt with things that were common in that space. But the real goal behind it all was to bring these communities together to help nurture these relationships. And it was really exciting to see people that were on our chat start to figure out which, like, in other words, you start out, it's everybody in the chat, so we're just talking, but these relationships formed and people started collaborating in different ways, and that got really exciting. And then we continued that and added, I think, a Facebook community, and continued to go back to South by Southwest EDU and sort of report on our progress over the
Wow.
years. Yeah. So it was
See,
really, really
that's a
great.
futurist. When you get to South by Southwest, or if you're in TED, that's how you're seen as a thought leader and a futurist. So, man, I am really fortunate to have you as a guest. That is
Thank
great.
you.
I always strive to have those kind of people that are more ahead of what either ahead of the trends, or they're on, right at the cusp of the trends. So that is great. That had to be super exciting to get that South by Southwest offer. Have you done a
Yeah,
TED Talk also? I'm
I
just
have
curious.
not. I have not.
Is that on your list?
I would certainly be open to it for sure.
Yeah, now I'm on the TEDx leadership team here in Orlando. So just so you know, if you look for TEDx events, that's a
Hmm.
way that you can get in relatively more easily than the one that's
Right.
the big one, the big TED. So
Yeah.
just throwing it as a seed in case you're
Thanks.
interested, and they're all over the country
Yeah.
and the world. Well, you said a couple of things there when you were sharing that with the fact that you had created this community. I love that. Community is awesome. Did it become global? It
Oh,
sounds like it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. Gosh, I think of so many of the people that I know now that, I met through that way back. And it's interesting because I don't know if you're familiar with the Sandbox game, which is a big player in sort of the metaverse stuff. When they had just an iPhone app called the Sandbox that was actually initially like a science app, they were involved in our community. And I remember speaking to the CEO, and it was just so neat to then meet him at like a conference because he had a small booth for this product. And now, I mean, they have this very big, um, you know, they're a big influencer in that space. But it was like, they saw the value of speaking with educators and all of that, and they're international. I forget, I don't even recall where Sebastian is from, but there are a lot of other international companies for sure that got involved, and teachers internationally. And it was always great. Like, one of the things that's great about that whole community and what's happened over the years is, like, you meet these people through these Twitter communities, and then you go to a conference and meet them in real life, and it's like, your lifelong, it's like your longtime friends, but just finally meeting in person. And that's something I really appreciate as well.
So yeah, I'm looking it up right now, and they are on point with the metaverse too. Sebastian Bourget,
But yep, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and Arthur Madrid,
I
co-founders.
I probably met both of them. I had a lot of interactions over the years with Sebastian for sure.
Yeah. Yep, that looks very interesting. And so that was back in 2012, it looks like. Um, gosh, I don't know when Meetup launched, but when you were describing the community, also I was going, was that
Mm.
pre-Meetup? Was that
You know,
pre-Eventbrite? I'm not sure.
that's a good question because there's so many great, like, now that you mention it, like New York has a great ed tech meetup community,
They do.
and things like that, are similar to what we were doing for sure, but now it's easier to meet in person that way at least.
Yeah, so does Boston. They
Yeah.
both do. New York
Wow.
and Boston, they're like really big. Just curious, I'm going, it's totally unrelated, but I'm going to the SAS TR conference. Do you guys head over there also?
Which conference is that?
SAS, software as a service.
Oh, no,
It's
but you
not
mean
at all what you guys do,
right,
but
right. But
didn't
you mean
know.
the SAS, the company, because they're located right here, if I'm
No,
or is that
it's
not right?
well, no, it's not the company, but this is an
Okay.
event and it's
Okay.
SaaS TR and TR is for training. And
Okay.
so it's to be able to take SaaS products, which are, focused on training and being
Okay.
able to, you meet with investors. There's all kinds of
Oh,
people that
neat.
are there. It's like a big deal and I'm going to that one. But it
Oh, cool.
reminds me, yeah, it's in California, um, the 13th through the 15th. But it's reminding me of like some things that I've done in Boston already. And I really would like to go to the Ed Tech event that you mentioned in New York,
Mm.
but it's at the same time I'm going to be in
Oh,
California.
but EdTech, that meetup, they meet like monthly. So you don't even
Mm,
have to. So it's definitely if the next time you're in New York, just see you know, some good people run that meetup as well. So
yeah,
definitely
I've
look
been to
into it.
the Meetup event that was in Boston. I'll go look for the one in New York and see if they
Hmm.
do it virtually also.
Maybe,
It's,
yeah.
yeah, super helpful. Well, I think COVID has changed that.
Uh,
So I think
Certainly.
everybody's doing meetup things like online now for
Yeah, for
sure.
sure.
Yeah. So what is it that your role is now with Epic Games and Unreal Engine
Hmm.
specifically? Because
Yeah.
I also, like I was telling our listeners, met you at the Serious Game Conference. So,
Right. So very grateful that Epic Games supports education to the extent that
mhm.
they do. Prior to actually starting, I applied for a mega grant and received that. But in the process of them, reading my grant proposal, like the education team, which was small at the time, it's still small, but Linda Selheim and Lisa Tenorio reached out to me because they liked the idea of the grant proposal, but then also were interested in starting things with secondary education, which they weren't doing much with yet. So at that time, I was writing some lesson plans for them and things, and then started editing or working with other teachers who were writing lesson plans. And then the position came about, which is what I have now full time, which is education program manager. And basically, my role involves supporting educators, secondary educators, so middle and high school, in bringing our tools into the classroom and adoption of our tools. And a lot of that has to do with developing resources that help with that onboarding process, help soften the learning curve. Unreal Engine is quite an amazing and big tool. So finding an easy point of entry for educators was really important for them to feel comfortable enough to bring these tools to their students. So a lot of it is developing those resources and working with people to support that, and then doing training. We do a 30-hour professional development experience around Unreal Engine, Fortnite Creative, and Twin Motion, where we feel that we do a really good job of getting teachers, like I say, ready to bring these tools into their classroom. And we guide them through our resources so they have a very easy starting point when they do go to the classroom, and also support them in creating their own learning materials that they
So
can
what
use.
was your grant proposal about? I'm curious about that because
Yeah,
I've written quite a few grant proposals and I do want to do one with Epic. And my
yeah.
game, just a little shout out there for Epic, is our game, which is on the Steam platform, is Intern Pursuit game. It is an Epic, we built it in Unreal Engine.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, so we
I
are
gotta check it out.
pro Epic. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. So my grant proposal when I was teaching, in the middle and high school, it was called Scalable Game Design from Fortnite Creative to Unreal Engine. And my goal there was kind of along the lines of kids are obviously engaged and love the game of Fortnite. Fortnite has a creative mode, so kids can develop their own games and experiences in that. But I also wanted to get my students, to a point where they were using Unreal Engine, which is, such an industry standard game design tool, but also used in so many other industries. So the goal was to bridge the gap, get kids excited about, you know, Fortnite, which is made with Unreal Engine, but with the
Mhm.
idea of helping them, scaffold their learning to get up to using Unreal Engine. Um, so that's what we did. And
How
a lot
much
of
was your grant for? What'd
it
you
was
get?
$25,000, which was great for a teacher who was basically that served to fund sort of the development of the curriculum and such.
Congratulations on that. That's
Thanks.
a big deal too. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
for real. Yeah. Yeah, well, and then let's talk, since we're talking about it, what is the Epic Game Grant all about?
Yeah. So the Epic Mega Grant, Epic committed, to supporting with $100 million of grant funding, basically for people who are doing kind of cool and innovative things with our tools. So one of the things that excited me, and again, this is why I feel so strongly about the company, is that out of the different areas that they were supporting, education was clearly one that they mentioned right on the site about things they're trying to support as education, as well as game development, as well as film. So there were some people doing, getting grants for probably feature films and big AAA games or aspects of them. And then education was also one of the aspects that they were supporting. So so thrilled about that. And they actually just they just revamped sort of the application process, but that's available on the Epic Mega Grant website.
That's good to know, because I'd like to go and tie the game that we have on Steam into cognitive behavioral learning.
Wow.
And right now it's set up so that you choose one of four players, just so
Hmm.
you know what it is. We are big in diversity.
Oh,
So
good.
there's two male, two female, and the major four race groups are there. Every planet has different aliens, a little bit Guardians of the Galaxy, a little bit Men in Black, a little bit of those. It'll have that feel, but every planet has a skill that you're playing to win. So now if we take it up another level, so it's really like a cognitive skill that people could get certifications for,
Oh, wow.
that would be cool.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
I gotta check it out.
Yeah, it's a third person tower defense. I'll send you.
Oh, please do.
Yeah,
That's
next time I see you, I'm gonna bring a game T-shirt for you.
all right.
Yeah, we've got our Intern Pursuit game T-shirt. I do proudly wear the Unreal Engine
Good, good.
T-shirt, yeah, that you
Yay.
gave me.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're coming back over here, and what is the hardest lesson that you've ever had to learn that changed your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a tough one too, but
Mm,
I would say so this was huge for me, probably both in education, but also in life, is, that I don't have to be in control, or that I can let go of control in ways. And the way I'll bring that up in education, and this was a huge lesson. I mean, to the point that without a doubt, it transformed my whole approach to teaching and learning. Um, Way back when my students wanted to bring mine started people well, I guess I should say I was starting to get more involved in game-based learning, and I met a lot of educators who were using Minecraft in the classroom, and I wasn't very familiar with the game. To be honest, at the time I didn't love the game. I do now. um, but I knew it was meaningful to kids, and I knew that there was enough about it that with what I did with game design, that kids could use Minecraft to build games and experiences. So I took a leap of faith and brought Minecraft into the classroom. I even started with thinking I was going to come up with this assignment idea that everybody was going to create a like a how did it was like an adventure game. I had sort of a model
mm,
in mind that I was like, well, this is something I could see happening in Minecraft. And a good friend of mine, Marianne Malmstrom, otherwise known as No Clue, No Clue Kid. Um, the first time I mentioned this, she said, "Well, why does it have to be like an adventure game?" And I thought about it. I'm like, "Wow." So now it actually made the assignment easier. The assignment was make a game in Minecraft, which was entirely open ended. But the idea was, what I did do is I still guided kids through the game design process, having them come up with a design document and everything. But I didn't know the tool, so I wasn't really going to stand in front of the room and teach them how to play Minecraft to develop this. So that's where, as we were talking about before with facilitator and things, I really took a step back, and it was like, okay, I'm going to just have everybody understand what you need to do for this design document. But after that, it was like, and they didn't have to use Minecraft. That was just one of the many things they could use. That was the other evolution, was that I allowed kids to choose whatever tool they wanted. But, I was sort of saying, but now you have to own that learning. But I guess it started, in a big way with Minecraft. And kids started, teaching me things. I started seeing what they were doing with it and was able to be really excited by what they were creating, even though I had no idea how they did it and wouldn't even pretend to act like I could do it. So they got to see a different side of me as a teacher, was like somebody who was, embracing what they were doing. We
Mm-hmm.
had one kid, one part of it that I loved is I got the sense from people that you needed a server to run your Minecraft worlds and this and that. And I had ideas for what I would like, but I had a student who said, "Oh, I have a server at home. I could set up a server." So he set up the server. His whole job in our class became like server administrator. And the neat thing was he knew some things, but I would come up with an idea. Like I'd say, "Hey, it would be really great if we could all enter one space in this world, and I can go through this portal or something and go to, you know, to Sophia's project, or I can go through this one and go to Joey's game, and we can make this whole like, which is like kind of like a metaverse, right?"
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of scratched his head, and he went home, and he comes back the next day and he says, "Mr. Isaacs, I figured it out." And he installed something called multiverse, and then he would show me just enough that I could like give kids like the area within this world that their plot of land might be that they would build on. And so I was doing little pieces as somewhat of an administrator, but really he was the man behind the yellow curtain. And
Mm-hmm.
and it was just amazing to start to, going to work every day became much more fun and exciting because it was always different. I would sit with kids and feel like they'd have a problem, and I'd be like, Let's try to figure it out. Like, I have no idea about the technical this part of it, but maybe I could support you by helping figure out what we could search for to find an answer." And it just became a whole different approach. And again, you know, prior to that, and I think this is an important lesson for educators, is we I think a lot of people that go into education because we kind of like a degree of control, and want
Oh
to
gosh,
stand
yeah.
we want to
Yes.
stand in front of the room, and we want to be the one that knows everything, and it doesn't have to be that way. And and if I could exercise that even more in my personal life, there's so much we don't have control over, and to try to control things doesn't typically, you know help anything. So
No.
that's probably
Every
my biggest
day
lesson.
is, to me, it's so funny that people will retire or something. I go, every day you open up your phone and, oh, there's something new on a social app or whatever,
Mm,
right? So to think that you're going to stop learning is, well, that
well,
could be, it could be a choice, but it's still going to happen.
yeah, yeah, no, I would never want to stop learning, that's for sure.
No, no, that's who you are. Um, and then what are you most grateful for?
So I'm grateful for a lot of things. One that comes to mind is I've had this really wonderful opportunity in life to sort of let my passions sort of guide my career, and I've been given the autonomy in many situations to kind of create my job and my I feel like we have, I mean, if we can, create the life we want, I mean, what can be better than that? And I've been given that opportunity quite often. And of course, I have to also express the deepest gratitude for my family, um and even related to the other in some ways, because I've gotten tremendous support. My wife has always been my biggest supporter and fan in terms of me going out and doing things. And it's kind of nice when your wife can be proud of you for things, and encourage that growth and things. So yeah, a lot of gratitude there, and certainly my kids have supported that as well.
It'd be nice, I don't know if this is possible. I know that we were going to talk about this nomination that you got to go to Singapore for a keynote speaker, but I'm pretty sure that your family goes, wait, can we go
Yeah.
on this
So,
trip?
and of course they can. So my wife is definitely going. We already have our tickets. I think my younger daughter, who is taking like sort of a gap year from school, and her biggest thing she wants to do during that is travel. There's a very good likelihood she will join us as well. My older daughter would love to as well. I don't know if that'll work, but yes. And one of the neat things, I mean, my wife and I work together. So a lot of the travel we do, we get to do together. And even if sometimes even for a trip, she might come with me and work remotely because we can do that even if she's not necessarily going for the business aspect. But yeah, which is nice. I mean, it's nice that we can do that.
It is. It is like the dream job that everybody looks for with the ability to do that. Well, we're going to take a brief break and then acknowledge our sponsor, and then we will be right back.
The Intern Whisperer is brought to you by CAT5 Studios, who help you create games and videos for your training and marketing needs that are out of this world. Visit CAT5 Studios for more information to learn how CAT5 Studios can help your business. Thank you, CAT5 Studios.
And so now we're back to the second half of our show, and we always focus on the future of what is the future going to look like in 2030? There is no right or wrong answer because none of us can see into the future, so it's just your personal opinion. We cover a lot of topics, Steve. Some of it is about COVID and the impact.
Mhm.
How is that going to move forward? Remote, blended, on-site, that's always the discussion, right? But we did touch on just a little bit about augmented reality, virtual reality, some of those things, and we covered Epic Grants. But I really wanted to focus on something that you created. I saw it come through on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and there's a book, The Metaverse by Matt Ball. You started a book club. What made you start the book club?
So a friend, online, first I should give credit to Ben Kelly, who um, sort of raised my awareness that the book was even coming out, was all excited because he had pre-ordered it. So I immediately did as well. And again, it has something to do with, I think, that whole connecting people thing. I feel like if I'm reading this book and I'm excited about it, I want to share that excitement with others that are excited about it. So I just kind of put it out there that, hey, I think maybe, and of course you always volunteer yourself when you do something like that. I'm like, I think it would be a good idea to have a book club, for this book. And there was a nice response to that. So currently we started it as a Twitter community. And it's basically just an open dialogue around the book and around metaverse topics and things, which I'm very excited about. From both you know, a, a, both as a consumer and as an educator. I just think you know it's very interesting. The direction we're going with the internet and the metaverse. So and the book is so well written, and it's such a great I think a lot of people just hear the term and aren't sure where, what it's all about. And this book does such a nice job of explaining both the challenges of the metaverse, the opportunities and possibilities, and all of that. And it covers quite a lot of ground. So it's a great, I think, primer for people to use as a starting point for discussions.
Mm. So, how did you hear about this book? I think you just briefly mentioned it,
Yeah.
but and where is this group? Like, if somebody wants to join, can they still
Yeah.
join?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in your show notes, or you're going to provide like my Twitter
Mm-hmm.
handle. Twitter's right now, it lives in Twitter, in a Twitter community. So Twitter has now communities you can set up. So it's kind of like you're still feeling like you're communicating through Twitter, but it's with that smaller group because once you're in that community. So there's a community dedicated to the book talk. Um, and anybody is welcome, of course. And the way I found out about it, was on Twitter. I had mentioned Ben Kelly is a great educator, and somebody who's also very interested in the metaverse. One of the people that I met years ago, probably around Minecraft and all the other things we were interested in. But he had tweeted out that he had pre-ordered the book, and I was like, I've got to get that. And I don't read a lot, so that's probably another part of the reason for it. Like I enjoy the interaction with people, So if we could interact around, this book and these topics, that's great. But I am enjoying reading it. So it's probably the only book I will read, this summer, although I'd love to read many more. Snow Crash, I might finally finish after this, but we'll see.
That is super good. So just so our listeners know when they find it, certainly we'll share his contact information at the end. But in Twitter, if you're looking at your Twitter app on your phone, you'll look for the little people icons, and that's the thing that they're using for communities. And you look for Metaverse Book Talk.
Yeah, I wonder if it shows up that way or if you need
I'm looking at it in my phone.
Okay, but you're in the community, so
Yeah, I
wonder if
am.
that. Yeah, so if you have any trouble finding it, definitely send me a note on Twitter. We'd love to have anybody who'd like to join us.
Yeah, I see a lot of really cool looking conversations in there. And I did get the book. I haven't started it, but it's on my to-do list for this week.
Awesome.
And I don't know how far anybody is. Is it like a real structured thing, or is it just kind of people jump into the conversations?
I think people are jumping into the conversation. I think as you read something that resonates with you, toss your thought out and then, see how people, engage with that. I want to do a few other things kind of with the community just because it focuses on things like the metaverse. Like I'd like to have some kind of casual events in some of the metaverse experiences. I don't know if anybody's used something called Gather, but Gather is like a 2D, in metaverse experience where you can go in and you could interact with you could sit at a table with a small group and have a small kind of like breakout discussion. You can talk in a larger group. You can create experience areas within it, even play games in it. So things like that. I want to use it as an opportunity to kind of dabble in those spaces with other people that are interested through that community.
Are you going to, it's in, I think, January or February of next year, the Future of Educational Technology?
Most likely. I've been to that conference many times.
I went to it this year, but I am going next year. It's in New Orleans.
Yeah.
I'll look for you there.
Okay,
sure.
please.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a few submissions in for talks, so we'll see how that goes. But it is a great conference.
It is. I applied for a media pass. And so when I go under the media pass, I get to go talk to everybody and go
Right.
to anything I want.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I bring them in as guests on the podcast. And then I've got another playlist we're setting up, and it's called Behind the HR Curtain. But it's like educational people too. So it's raw, uncut conversations. Anyway, so that's super good. And I will look for you there.
Yes, definitely.
So what do you think, based on you were just sharing about the metaverse? Oh, I'm going to share this too. So I'm in Orlando, Florida, and there's a hierarchy, first, second, and third place in the metaverse. And we have Kathy Hackle as, she's third highest in the metaverse as an expert. She represents Orlando, and she's helping to us as we begin to brand Orlando as a place that is the meta center. So
wow.
So this is what's coming. Yeah. Now it's been press releases and things like that are out, so I can definitely talk about it. But I'm a member of Orlando Tech Council, and so it's always about elevating Orlando as a brand too.
Oh, great. I'll look for how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll send you some channels that you can follow a little bit more. You seem interested in that. So what do you think, robots, AI, augmented reality, virtual reality, what do you think this is all going to be like in 2030? It's anybody's guess.
Yeah, it certainly is. Gosh. So, AR and VR, I find something very interesting about that. When I was in the classroom, I was doing a lot of work with my students with VR. We were even part of some virtual reality in the classroom research with a group, an organization called Foundry 10 in Seattle. And my goal there was to work with students on creating content, for VR. And part of that was, my thought was, everything in VR felt like it was very much in beta. Like they would put out these products, but it would be like, I'd still feel like nothing was quite ready for prime time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're still on a very slow path for that. We've made progress. I think there are certain things you could do in VR that are unique and interesting. and all of that. I think certain things like experiences around empathy are powerful in VR because of the immersion and probably because there are less distractions outside. But I think we have a long way to go. Similar with AR, although we're doing very cool things, I think, as we start realizing that we can create 3D scans out of everything in the world now, I think we're going to see much more in terms of interesting, digital twins.
Oh, we have that in Orlando. We have a digital twin also.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there'll be more of that kind of thing coming. I think, gosh, I mean, AI, like I think we've made tremendous advances with, self-driving cars and that technology. I don't know if we'll get to the point by 2030 where you would literally just I keep envisioning a time when instead of facing the steering wheel, that all four, people in the car will be facing each other because the car is
Like a
truly
limo.
driving. Yeah. So I don't know if we'll get to that by then. That would be kind of cool, I think, if we get to this point where, you just plug something into the GPS and your car safely gets you there. In some interesting ways, it could probably do it often safer than we could because of both cars. If every car is doing it, they're gonna watch out and respond differently and better, I hope, to each other. But we'll see. So AI in ways like that, I think, is really interesting. I mean, robotics, we've seen tremendous progress in terms of like things like robotic surgery and all of that. So I don't know how far we'll go in terms of, are we gonna, is it gonna be the Jetsons? I don't quite know. But with the metaverse, I think, that's I guess one of my main areas of interest. And I still think we have a long way to go because we have a number right now. We have, I think, an idea of what these metaverse experiences are like, and we can live them to a point. Like you could go to a Travis Scott concert in Fortnite with 10 million other people. You know, Interesting how the technology has to be fragmented to do that, but that's at least the idea. But and the book will reveal a lot of this too. I think we have some interesting challenges around the power of computers that's necessary, the you know the transfer of data and the bandwidth, that there's always going to be some limitations there that might present challenges. Interoperability around, like, if I buy an item in one environment, can I easily take it with me to all these other different applications, or can I hop from one game world to another and maintain my presence with my same avatar? Are those things really gonna, what's gonna, make what's it gonna take to make that happen? So, but what I find exciting about that, and this is where I think the companies, including Epic, that are most excited and interested in the metaverse are on board for the fact that they have to work together in order to create this open metaverse, which is so exciting to me. So it's like, we're not saying or I hope not. I mean, some companies would like to be. I don't think we want a company that's going to be the metaverse, like America Online used to seem like it owned the internet, right? Like, we don't want a company to do that, but we want companies working together. And the fact that there are so many big companies that are willing to, collaborate in a way in order to get to that vision, I think is super exciting, and really, I think, transforms a lot of, like there's going to be the economy piece is going to be a big part of it, but I don't think we're saying that but at the same time, in order for it to happen, there has to be this cooperation among you know these big companies and such. So it'll be really interesting to see. Let's set our calendar for 8 years from now, and we'll revisit this discussion and see where we are in 2030.
Yeah, we have a lot of these things. I don't think people know what's going on in Orlando, to be honest. We have the biggest simulation and training
Right.
conference. The ITSEC conference
ITSEC,
is
right?
here
Yeah.
every year. right at the end of Thanksgiving, first week of December.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a photonics. We have a plant that's now up. We have all types of crazy technology things that are here. Miami is also part of the cryptocurrency. So
Right.
there's
Right.
there's so much here. I think
Yeah, there
that
is a lot.
yeah, like you cannot believe, and when people hear about it, they go, "Wait, what?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this great standard of living here. So
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, it doesn't get cold like it does in other places. Not as cold for sure.
No.
All right, so we are going to be closing in here on the end of the show. We have about 5 more minutes, but I want to throw one more question at you here. So when you were mentioning autonomous cars and all of these things that you were talking about, we have Luminar Tech. Those are autonomous cars. We actually have some cars that are being tested in Lake Nona that drive themselves, and like, cabs, I'll call it, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and some little buses. So a lot of those things are here. But what I think that I haven't seen as much is, the Star Trek, the old Star Trek where it's beam me up, Scotty,
Yeah.
and all of the particles, and then you land there. That's what I think is, I don't know. I
Wow.
think they're secretly testing it,
It's a
and I
little
think it's
hard to
going to
imagine,
happen.
but it's funny you say that because, and I'll just kind of y- I one of the technologies I always had a really hard time with was the fax machine.
Yeah.
I never quite trusted, for one. I always had to call the person I faxed something to see if it really got there. But the technology just seemed odd to me. Like, I'm putting a piece of paper in here, and I understand, especially with current technology, I can kind of imagine how it works. But the idea of
Hmm.
putting a piece of paper in here and it ending up there kind of made me just kind of laugh a little, thinking about your idea of the teleportation. Like, that paper clearly is not being, going to these particles and then going there. But that's kind of what came to mind for me as my probably impression of what was happening with the fax machine. And the thought of us being teleported like that just sounds incredibly hard to imagine. I believe we will certainly find very fast ways of transportation. I don't love the idea of my body being, whether it be decomposed and then,
Particleized,
yeah, I don't
right?
know about that. But I guess if it got me, to Europe in minutes, maybe I'd be okay with it. But I don't know. It sounds like sounds like trouble waiting to happen.
See, that's the thing, Steve. Everybody thought that about, flying. Let's go back to the
Sure.
Wright brothers,
Sure.
right? No, man cannot fly.
Right.
No, man cannot go into outer space. No, no, no. But yet it's
Yep.
happened.
Yeah.
So
And I certainly am, very excited about what's possible and the advances we could make. But, every once in a while you have one that might not sit so well. So it'd be
I
interesting
think
to
they're
see.
doing it. We
Yeah,
just don't even know
maybe.
about it because like I was looking up when did the internet get started? It was back in the 50s. They were
Yeah.
over
Yep.
there
Yep. You're right.
in Boston, people are working on it. So
Right.
I don't know. I'm going to throw this one out. Sorry, listeners. But I don't know how many animals have died in trying to, particleize them and move them places. But I'm hoping they're
Mm.
doing it with tomatoes, not
Yeah.
with.
You could do it with a book,
It's
it doesn't
still
have
a
to be
living item is a plant, right? You can
right.
still test
I
things that
guess if you
way.
have to, yeah, 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 you're right.
Yeah,
Oof.
no
Yeah.
monkeys were harmed with this experiment
Right.
or
Right.
dogs. I'm sorry.
Right.
Anyway, what is the best mentoring advice that you would like to share with our listeners? And it can be your advice, it can be something
Hmm.
that's been passed on, living or
Sure.
dead, anything.
You know, I think that if we could support, people in following their passion, like, I like the fact that I can say that even though my path doesn't seem like as an educator, you know, um, the fact that I was able to also integrate my passion for games and things like that, I think allowed me to always kind of have that, somewhere in the mix. Um, if we could support, kids in finding and nurturing their passion, I think then we're doing a service to everybody. I think people excel at things that they're excited about. I think we have, always had sort of strange ideas about what people should do. Um, my my daughter's reading a book right now. I think it's called F the Shoulds, Do the Wants. And, there's something to that I can agree with. And I want her to find that. I want, you know, I, I'm not the biggest fan of traditional education. I think in education, that should be our mission there, is to help kids find and nurture their passion, whatever that
People,
might be.
just
Yeah.
even people, right?
Or
Because we
people,
have
people.
non-traditional age students, people that go
Yeah.
back to school, single parents, all kinds of
Right.
people.
Yeah.
So, and 7 careers, Steve, 7.
Right. Right. And
So,
the interesting thing is, so I haven't had 7 careers per se, but I've reinvented myself within my career path numerous
yes,
times,
within the industry you've been
Yeah.
in. So, yeah, it's definitely 7 times.
Yeah. Right.
Based on what you've shared here, I'm going, my God, you started a giant community. That counts as one. That's not
Yeah.
easy. You were a classroom teacher, but then you were also over here working, being so innovative with, anybody that was at risk, and whether they were, English ESOL students or in this case, people with special educational needs. Yes, you have done all of these things, and you're very future forward with, working on even that grant to bring, STEM into a place that it just wasn't there before. Okay, I'm just saying you are
Thanks.
that futurist.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, what do you say? But
Right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are. Well, how can people find you? What
Yeah.
is it that you want to share with us?
Sure. Absolutely Twitter. I love, I've made so many, great connections on Twitter that have turned into great friendships, and part of that community building. So, please, reach out to me on Twitter. It's at Mr. like MR underscore Isaacs, ISAACS. And on LinkedIn, I think the profile is under Steve Isaacs,
It is.
ISAACS.
Yeah.
Yeah, so please,
Yeah.
love to hear from you. I'd love to connect. It's what I like.
That is perfect. So just so our listeners know too, all of this information you'll find either if you watch this video, you'll see it in video form. It'll be on our YouTube channel and it's in the description, so you can find that contact information there. And if you listen to it on a podcast, you will find it as part of the description of the show, and you'll be able to track him down just so that
Please.
people can find you. Steve, this has been great. I've really enjoyed the
Thanks.
conversation. I have 2 Unreal Engine t-shirts. I want to get a third
right.
one. They're
All
all
right.
different. So
Oh,
I'm
cool.
looking for whatever
I'll
the
have to see
third
if
one
we
is.
have a new one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Cool.
will tell you, I work out of a place called Orlando Game Space, and
Right.
there's about 40 game companies in there, different people.
Wow.
They're usually VR, simulation, AR, a
cool.
lot of those things. But Unity has presence there. I have been trying desperately to get Unreal to have a presence in there also. So I'm going to keep having that as a conversation, maybe
Cool.
with you.
Cool.
But I am the only one that has an Unreal Engine t-shirt that wears it into place.
Great. Keep wearing it.
I will. And they all are impressed because
That's great.
Unreal is a great product. Love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to thank you for being a guest, and I look forward to seeing you at some of the upcoming
Yes,
conferences.
Definitely. Thanks, Bella. It was great speaking with you.
I want to thank our sponsor, CAT5 Studios, and thank you to our production team, Ayana Saunders, and our music by Sophie Lloyd. Would you like to have your inclusion tip of the week shared on our show? Be sure to record it, send it to us as an audio file to info@e4c.tech, and include your name, your job role, and where you work. We'll give you a shout out there, and we will also email you some green screens that you can use on your next video conference call that come from our Intern Pursuit games. Be sure to visit Employers for Change at www.e4c.tech, TECH, to learn how you can create real diversity and inclusion culture while scaling your people for the future of work. We want to thank you for supporting our show, The Intern Whisperer, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast channel or on Podbean, and be sure to watch it on our YouTube channel.